Hello, everybody, and welcome to another Top 10 edition of Magic Mics. Proudly sponsored by our Patreon supporters and CoolStuffInc.com, where you can find cool stuff in stock every day, and our co-sponsor CardHoarder.com, offer the best inventory prices and delivery of cards for Magic Online. I'm Evan Irwin, and we get started each week by saying hello to my two co-hosts, Aaron Campbell.
I get to see you guys soon.
Next week, yeah. Ruben Bressler.
I have to see you guys soon.
Oh,
Next
Ruben's too
week.
good for us now that his little
That's right.
show.
I'm big timing now. I'm Los Angeles celebrity Ruben Bressler.
That's right, LA's
Big
own.
timing. They recognized me at the Apple Genius bar. Didn't you hear? I'm big time now.
Woo!
Big. Congratulations. We were just little stepping stones, man.
That's
we were
right.
Just right in your way.
All you were on the way.
Well, we also begin with our choice of the top comment from last week and a segment we call Honorable Mention, where Ruben will tell us who was the most luxuriant and letting us know what card we did not choose as one of our top 10 land destruction spells. Ruben?
I wouldn't say that there was an overwhelming presence of people who thought that we forgot Plow Under, but it was certainly noticeable. It was certainly the 11th place pick, and this week's winner is one of those from Rich Leclerc on YouTube, who writes, I am ashamed that Plow Under is not on anyone's list. It is the worst possible feeling to know the next two draws, you only have lands coming. Not to mention you're down 2 lands in play. Just an incredible land destruction spell, and nothing they will ever come close to printing ever again.
Yeah, that's very true. Yeah, that was another one of those where I was going through the YouTube comments and I tend to nod along with most of them. We're like, oh, that's good. That's cute. And that was one where I was like, I literally, oh my God, like, how did we forget Plow Under? Like, oh, so good.
Yeah. I felt a little bad about it. I felt, it was one of those, when you look back, I mean, for God's sake, they put it in a standard with Eternal Witness. You could plow under, Eternal Witness, plow under. I mean,
the first time that it was in standard, it was bad enough when they printed it in Urza's Destiny. Then they printed it alongside of Eternal Witness in standard in 8th or 9th edition. Just a real problem card. And even things like Primal Command that do that effect, or Brutalizer Exarch. It's just a real problem.
Mm-hmm. It's just so demoralizing,
Yeah.
Because you're like, you're not doing anything the next couple turns, just drawing those lands again, and you're down the lands, and I'm going to get it back. Oh, I get to play it again, and like it's just my game keeps going, your game stops. It's quite the demoralizer. So
there was a card called Stunted Growth, I think is what it was called.
Mm-hmm,
it was basically Plow Under for your hand, and that card was also miserable. It was like 3 colorless, green. An opponent chooses 3 cards in their hand and puts them on top of their library, and that was also brutal.
Was that 3 or 2 cards?
I think it was 3 cards.
Okay, that's.
I don't remember off the top of my head. I'll look it up.
All right.
While you do the other information.
It's 3 cards, absolutely.
All right, there we go.
Printed in Ice Age, still brutal, and still not modern legal because you didn't want any of that.
Because that would be absurd.
That's right. So, we are choosing our top 10 Pauper cards this time.
Or Pauper, as my friend Kendra says, Pauper.
Or the Pauperist.
That's Pauper.
Yep, Pauper to the people.
Nice.
I've told her to copyright that. She hasn't yet. I'm very upset.
Nice. Well, we have... For me, it was interesting sort of how I wanted to frame this one, and sometimes top 10 lists aren't always sort of universally expected to be in a certain fashion. So the way I did my list was I said, look, the instant I see this card, I know it's this deck.
Sure.
That's kind of the way I wanted, like, sort of the bellwether, like, oh my God, they first turned X or they second turn Y. I'm playing against that. And it's one of the marquee cards because that's what gets it kicked off. So with that said, thanks very much to, what was the name again?
This was
Rich Leclerc.
Rich Leclerc.
Please hit us up on a social channel so we can get you your $50 gift certificate from CoolStuffInc.com. Thanks very much for Cool Stuff for sponsoring that.
Thank you.
That said, we are going to get started with our top 10 Pauper cards. Ruben, where did your list kind of originate from and why, and what's your number 10?
I mean, there was a point at which I was building this list where I thought to myself, am I going to stick with my traditional way of building these lists? And I ultimately did. I ultimately pretty close stuck to what kind of cards have the most ubiquity, what kind of cards have the most tournament success, see the most play in the most decks, and have the biggest, longest history. I did decide to go with personally, I went with cards that are currently in Pauper as opposed to cards that are banned, or that have, and also ones that have a lot of tournament pedigree throughout their history, not just currently. But there were many, many ways to interpret this list of being the top Pauper cards. And so I'm really excited to see what you guys have to say as well. And the reason why I'm most excited is because we have very little crossover on all of our lists.
Yeah.
I only have 2 hires, and someone you have 1 hire, Aaron, and I think Evan also has 2 hires. And I guess we should kick things off in the traditional way with my number 10 is higher on someone else's list.
Wow. Oh, beautiful. That's just perfect. Absolutely. Aaron, what is your number 10 and how did you come up with your list?
So Pauper for me is like the Wild West. Like I'm always surprised at the decks that are good and the strategies that see a lot of play. There's a lot of like, that's a thing. Like, okay, like it really is a different world than we're used to, than standard players are used to or modern players are used to. And so I really wanted cards that were unmistakably Pauper, like cards that you just will never find in any other format, but that see a lot of play here and that oftentimes are powerhouses in the format. And so my number 10, I really wanted to focus on kind of the finance side of things. One of the hilarious things about Pauper is the difference in price. Pauper started off, I believe, as a Magic Online format. And so a lot of times you will find cards that on paper are like less than $1, but on Magic Online, they can go for up to $10 because they're not printed as frequently on Magic Online. Specifically my number 10, which I learned the hard way when I was trying to build Tortured Existence. I couldn't figure out why this card was $6 on Magic Online when it goes for $1 on CoolStuffInc.com. My number 10 is Thorn of the Black Rose. So Thorn of the Black Rose is from Conspiracy Take the Crown. It's a human assassin, 1 power, 3 toughness, 3 colorless, and a black to pay for it. It has Death Touch. And then when Thorn of the Black Rose enters the battlefield, you become the Monarch. And so the Monarch is powerful in Pauper. You have Boros Monarch, which is a red-white deck that I would actually play. We all know I don't like red, but I do enjoy that deck. And Monarch sees a lot of play here. Monarch typically is thought of as more of a legacy thing, what with Death and Taxes, but mono black decks love the Monarch. Tortured Existence decks love the Monarch. And specifically this card, it gives you a way to sort of get the Monarch back, where, if you are playing a mono black deck, you have things like there's the little Unearth card. It's like the one that lets you bring back a creature of like 3 or less.
Yeah, Unearth. Yeah.
Unearth is a thing. So there's a way to bring that back. Or if you're playing Tortured Existence, you can just loop it and make sure that you always have the Monarch. And so there's a lot of really neat ways to manipulate this card. At worst, it just makes a fine blocker. But yeah, it's very interesting to sort of note the differences there, which we'll maybe talk about throughout the show, of cards that you can get for very cheap on paper are surprisingly expensive on Moto.
Yeah.
Yeah, because they didn't have an actual release of Conspiracy, because they just did it through like treasure chests or whatever, and that frequency is whatever Wizards wants it to be, and clearly it's not a ton, but they could also ratchet it back so it's even more expensive. So I guess in some ways, is that a good thing? Is that a healthy amount of money for that card, for that effect? Maybe, but it's a terrific card in and of itself. Like becoming the Monarch is huge in Pauper.
Yeah, exactly. There's also a white card that turns you into the Monarch as well, and we've seen the power of the Monarch in Legacy with Palace Jailer, and so being able to get card advantage in colors with effects that you would not get is a very powerful effect.
Absolutely. All right, so for my number 10. This was the card that defined the archetype. This is one of those, it's the blank deck, right? And when I say the blank deck, you're like, oh, I know exactly what you're talking about. Because the ability to manipulate, power and toughness is really interesting. And to have an entire deck who is focused on just pumping and pumping and pumping and then swapping with a card called Inside Out. Inside Out is a common from Eventide. It is it mana plus a generic mana, so blue or red plus a generic mana. It is an instant that switches target creature's power and toughness until end of turn, and then you draw a card. So not only are you creating these huge, what's the creature here? I'm trying
Tireless
to pull it.
Tribe.
Thank you,
Tireless Tribe.
Yes. Is a thing, and then you're essentially able to turn around and then get them out of nowhere because you've done nothing but discard cards to Tireless Tribe. You have your Augur of Bolus. You have all these spells that just essentially draw you cards, your Preordained, your Ponders. You're just trying to find it. Your Shadow Rift is going to give it Shadow, which is interesting, so it can't be blocked. Your Circular Logic is going to use all the spells in your graveyard that you've been filtering through to get all of your combo going, essentially. And you're just going to kill them out of nowhere. And Inside Out is a really cool card that just kind of defines an archetype almost accidentally.
Yeah, I got to watch the second action. Darkest Mage, the young man, the streamer known as Darkest Mage, he loves this deck. And I remember watching him crush a Pauper challenge with this deck, and it was fascinating. And there are quite a few decks in Pauper that have that sort of explosiveness to them. Is It Blitz is another one, sort of play lots of spells and make a really big kiln fiend. And this is a really neat take on it. There's a card that's also a staple of this deck, which is higher on my list, which we'll certainly talk about. But yeah, it's a very, very fun deck to watch. And again, just another one of those cards where it's like, this is a thing, like Eventide, like okay. Right.
And this is not the first time that Inside Out's not the first time that we saw that effect. Of course, Urza's Legacy gave us About Face, which I don't know if we'll talk about later, but and the most recent printing of this effect is actually on a rare, which is coming out very, very soon, called Expansion and Explosion, that had a little bit of controversy around it because it got some day zero errata, because Expansion does not particularly say, or sorry, not Expansion Explosion, the other, split card? It was Invent. That makes a lot more sense when you invert two creatures.
Yes.
And Invert did not have the end of turn clause written on it.
Yeah.
It's also insanely confusingly worded.
It's very insanely and confusingly worded. Absolutely.
Switch the power and toughness of each of up to 2 target creatures. When you're of, like, come on now.
It's a popular effect, Twisted Image. You've seen play in Modern, specifically against the spell skites of the world. And so, yeah, this effect is not terribly common, but it has made impacts in competitive
And of course, my land brother from another mother, the Wandering Fumarole, is able to powers and toughness as well.
Yeah, it just does it as a thing, yeah.
All right, so let's move on here to number 9. Ruben, what's your number 9?
Speak of the devil and they shall appear. My number 9 is Tireless Tribe.
Nice.
Nice. It was worthy of referencing by itself on the list. I mean, it's pretty tough. Honestly, this is the only white card on my list. And so white does not get a ton of love in Pauper, especially nowadays. But really, as we were just talking about, it's worthy of its own mention in its own deck. You run 4 of Tireless Tribe in all of those decks, not just 4. Sometimes you run Dizzy Spell to be able to transmute for other Tireless Tribes. So I thought it was worthy of talking about Tireless Tribe by itself. For those of you who are unaware of what Tireless Tribe does, originally a common, obviously, from Odyssey. The 1/1 for 1 white mana human nomad that has the ability of discard a card. Tireless Tribe gets +0/+4 until end of turn. And then, of course, with power and toughness switching effects, that's able to turn it into a X1 as opposed to a 1X. Tireless Tribe also occasionally sees play in Aaron's beloved Dredge decks in Legacy as a discard outlet as well.
Yeah, I was really surprised. This was a very pleasant surprise when I first started playing Pauper. I've always thought of Tireless Tribe in this sort of very narrow vacuum of like, just puts things in your graveyard, but it's like, oh no, it's a win con. Like you get that thing really, really big, and then you whoop, and you kill someone with it, and I think it's glorious. It is part of the reason why I do like the deck.
It's really interesting. If you go back on MTG Goldfish, for example, they have the price charts, right, where you can see it. And right around early 2018 is when Pauper started to blow up, right? They had the big Pauper events, and they were starting to put it at the Grand Prix, and everyone started to go and attend. And it got up to over $3 at one point. Almost $4. And these days, it's, I don't know, it's what, like $1 or so, like less than $1, 75 cents. And it's interesting to see that kind of wave of hype. And then it's like, okay, guys, let's relax. The commons ain't worth that much.
It is a combo deck. I mean, there are very few actual honest-to-God combo decks in Pauper.
Oh, yeah.
It's pretty tough to put together those types of combo decks with that sort of deck building restriction of only building with commons, and this is one of the few.
I think we're going to have this happen sort of multiple times, where we're going to talk about this one card that's like the key to this deck, and then we pick a different card in the same deck about it being the key. But whatever. Aaron, what's your number 9?
There's been a lot of talk lately about Tron in Modern, and specifically people have kind of reached their breaking point. If they're sick of Tron, they've had it with Tron. So many cards that have come out in these Guilds of Ravnica spoilers, people just are automatically Assassin's Trophy, gets rid of Tron lands. There was a new sort of surgical effect that came out today for 1 blue and a black Tron lands. Like everybody's just sort of pasting Tron lands to every card and hoping that it destroys Tron. Tron is also a thing in Pauper. A lot of you might be horrified to find that out, but Tron's very much a thing. And my number 9 is a very recent card. I believe it came out in Battle for Zendikar initially, but it slotted right into the Tron Tron decks. The Tron decks in Pauper are surprisingly good at gaining life, which is kind of terrifying when you think about it.
Yeah.
And this is one of the reasons why. My number 9 is Pulse of Marasa. So Pulse of Marasa is 2 and a green. It's an instant. It says return target creature or land card from a graveyard to its owner's hand. You gain 6 life. So if you're running these sort of, these cheap artifacts that you can discard to do a thing, it's very easy to get things, that you can sort of get your green mana. You're going to be cracking a lot of lands. You've got your cycling land, the new Ash Barrens that the kids love, the Evolving Wilds, or even just a creature. And this is very interesting footnote. It doesn't need to be your graveyard. So if you're really, really hard up for 6 life, you can just be like, you can have your Evolving Wilds back. I'm gonna gain 6. Like, that's a thing. And so Tron's very good at making a lot of mana. It's very good at getting things back from the graveyard and gaining a lot of life. And I was very surprised to see that Marasa Tron is very much a thing.
Yeah, I mean, Tron is a force to be reckoned with. Interestingly enough, printed as a common Oath of the Gatewatch, an uncommon in Battle Bond. That's really neat.
Yeah.
But it also helps your teammate a whole lot to be able to give them back their best creatures. So I can see the bump in rarity making sense.
Yeah.
All right. Ruben, what is your... actually, no, I get to talk about my number 9. Yay! I love my number 9.
What a pump fake.
Tell you what. This creature has only been printed once, but it did make it all the way, I'm pretty sure, as I recall, all the way to the Pro Tour Finals. I want to say maybe it even won. But it is a card that presents an immediate evasive threat. It's a card that can sort of immediately key you into, I'm playing that deck, because they want to play something that makes an artifact, and then they want to play Glinthawk, because Glinthawk is awesome. Glinthawk is a 1-white 2/2 flyer that when it enters the battlefield, you sacrifice it unless you return an artifact you control to its owner's hand. So essentially, you are playing the Kuldotha Boros deck, and you're able to say, well, I get to pick up this artifact that draws me a card, and when I do that, I get to pick up this other artifact if I'm somehow able to blink it or whatever, and this card kind of glides you on to victory. And I believe wasn't it Conley Woods was playing this deck? It was playing the Tempered Steel aggro thing.
Lots of people were playing the Tempered Steel deck that Glinthawk was a part of, but it also at Pro Tour Nagoya, David Scharfman won the Pro Tour with the Pure Steel Paladin deck.
Nice.
That had 4 Glinthawks in it as well. The artifact aggro strategy, very, very powerful in Pauper, and obviously was very popular while it was in Standard as well, being able to pair with Memnite and Ornithopter specifically in those kinds of decks, or other 0 mana artifacts, things like Mox Opal. In Pauper, it has a bunch of different utility, but being a 2/2 flyer is certainly nothing to sneeze at.
Yeah,
right.
Plays very well in the Boros Monarch deck, which you had mentioned earlier. I think the Kuldotha and the Boros are the same deck, but it's also interesting what counts as an artifact. These decks tend to run Thraben Inspectors, which make Clue tokens. Clue is an artifact if you really, really need an artifact. You're also running a lot of the artifact lands, so if you don't necessarily need to have a card that says artifact. There's lots of clever ways to meet that qualification. And usually they use cards like Alchemist Vial, they use Prophetic Prism and things like that. And so very easy way to meet that requirement in a very unique way as well.
Like you can literally play an Ancient Den, play the Glinthawk, and just pick up the Ancient Den and say, go. Probably not so great to time walk yourself, but still, it's a thing that you can do if you want to start putting on pressure immediately, which is what the deck wants to do. Yeah,
when fighting alongside of which another card we may talk about later, but I'll reference it here. Glinthawk's able to return an artifact to your hand, as is Core Skyfisher, which is another major piece of those sort of Boros kind of aggro decks. And so you're able to reuse different effects with that, being able to return Prophetic Prisms to your hand and the like.
My God.
I remember the first time I faced a Boros Monarch deck, I was like, oh, that's supposed to be a drawback. And I'm like, it's not a drawback. No. And they're very happy to bounce everything they have.
It's not a bug, it's a feature.
Right.
That's a feature.
And my God, Palace Sentinels are $10.50 a piece online.
That's the other. That was the other Pauper Monarch card. Yeah,
you can bounce them with your Skyfisher.
That's insane. All right, so we'll move on here to number 8. Ruben, what is your number 8?
My number 8 is one of the most played creatures in the format, and it sees play in only one deck. And it's been around since damn near the beginning of Magic the Gathering. And it is near and dear to everyone's heart, including Mr. Mark Rosewater, who named his blog after this creature type, the blog Atog. My number 8 is Atog or Atog or Atog.
How dare you? You didn't even mention Rich Shea.
Look, shout out to Rich Shea, but he's not the Pauper All-Star. He's the vintage gentleman.
That's true, yeah.
A Tog was originally printed in the revised expansion, I believe.
Nope.
And I want to read to you the
Antiquities.
Is it Antiquities was first?
Antiquities.
Okay, Antiquities was first. And it was a common in that set, although later printed in Mirrodin and 5th edition as an uncommon.
Mm-hmm.
I want to read to you the adorable original text because it's awesome. Hey, Zero, great. +2/+2 till end of turn. Each time you choose this ability, you must choose one of your artifacts in play and place it in the graveyard. Better known today as sacrifice an artifact.
Place it in the graveyard.
This artifact cannot be one that is already on its way to the graveyard. Thanks for that clarification, Magic the Gathering. An artifact creature is killed in this way cannot be regenerated. It does give it +2/+2. It is a 1/2 for a colorless and a red mana. Just a hugely relevant creature in the affinity decks that are very popular in the format. As a finisher, combo with the card Fling for massive amounts of damage. Being able to get past those board stalls that can often muck up the ground in Pauper with decks like Tortured Existence or Elves or Stompy or any of those decks that dump a lot of creatures onto the board, or just, affinity mirror matches. Being able to fling an ATOG is a huge deal.
Yeah, or even just Disciple of the Vault. I remember I was facing Affinity one time, and I thought I had enough to deal with everything, and then I started to put the pieces together, and I was like, oh, it really is almost like the Arcbound Ravager of the deck of sacrifice. Then you're losing life from all the vault triggers, and oh, I'm just dead.
We're just done here. There was this weird obsession with the early cards and the way they explain how things happen, that there was kind of avenues that cards went down on their way to the graveyard, through your library and your deck on your way to your hand.
It makes sense, especially with how so many of the rules have these sort of in response to kind of things, or people like to argue how it's going to resolve. And so on the one hand, it is silly to laugh about now, but I can see how back in the day, people might have been like, oh, well, on the way to the graveyard, we're going to do, no, girl, just get in there. Do not pass go, do not collect $200. So I get it.
There was last in, first out there for a very long time.
Yeah.
There were interrupts, which were faster than instants. And
mana sources.
Oh, God, mana sources were bad. They were ridiculous. Aaron, what's your number 8?
My number 8 is the only higher on my list.
I see. All right, then. That's cool. Well, let me tell you. My number 8 is a format-defining card, a card that sees play all the way back into Modern. We'll probably see play for a very, very, very long time, because what it does, it is very efficient at. What it does as efficiently as you probably can do it, as efficiently as Wizard is probably ever going to print it. Because who's going to win? The Modern format or one slippery boy? One slippery bogle, if you will. Another from Eventide, which is interesting. I got a bunch of Eventide cards in here. Yeah. Because slippery bogle, or boggle, or however the hell you want to say it, is a bogle. Is it bogle?
There's no. If it was boggle, it would have 2 G's.
Fair enough. It's a slippery bogle. It is. It's a green/blue, so it's a Simic mana for a 1/1 common beast, and it can't be the target of spells or abilities your opponents control, also known as hexproof. So the Slippery Bogle deck is a deck that exists even all the way down into Pauper. That deck will annoy you just as much as it does any other format of you going, I can't target it, there's not much I can do about it, oh my god, it's gone there's a runaway train kind of feeling. If I'm playing black decks in Pauper, I'm like, sweet, Chainer's Edict or whatever, or we're gonna do whatever it takes to get rid of that guy, that's fine. But some other decks, there's nothing you can do but just I'm dead. I can't. It abysses me every turn.
Yeah, the cartouches are really big in the Pauper Bogle decks. Ancestral Mask is sort of their version of Daybreak Coronet. It just gets out of hand very, very quickly. Rancor, they love them some Rancor. And it's funny, this deck even has a really great way to they'll suit up anything. I remember I was facing a deck one time that had, it was a Eldrazi, it was a feed something. And it made a 0/1. It was a 2/2 that made a 0/1. And I killed the 2/2 and I was like, it's a 0/1, it's fine. Right. And all of a sudden they started shooting up the 0. Yeah, there we go. Yeah. And then they started shooting up the 0/1, and I was like, oh, and before I knew it, it's a 3/4 to 5.
That's my favorite thing. Back in Old Modern, when I played Hexproof in Old Modern, my favorite thing to do was to suit up a Dryad Arbor because they can't target it with Abrupt Decay.
Colony Garden, they'll put it on a plant. Yeah, have a good time.
Yeah, definitely a force to be reckoned with, the Hexproof deck with the boots and pants and boots and pants and boots and pants. In the Pauper format as well, with ethereal armor and other armadillo cloak and stuff like that, all the way through the history of Magic. It's nice that there's a little bit of redundancy with Blade Cover Scout as well. But I think if they this would be a problem if they printed a third 1/1 for 1. To be able to give the deck that much more redundancy, it would be a real issue.
It has several, so it uses also. Oh, for 1 you said, okay.
For one, yeah. The Silhana Ledgewalker I can deal with. That costs twice as much to play.
I'm also going to make that my drag name this week. Silhana
Ledgewalker.
Nice.
It's a good idea.
On the ledge.
Miss Ledgewalker, if you're nasty.
That's right. I don't know. They keep saying there's like this narrative of like, guys, we're tired of hexproof too. We get it. We understand.
Pirate.
And there's a freaking monster giant thing with hexproof on it. And we're like, okay, Wizards, thanks. And they're like, here's our new Ravnica set with a 6/6 for 4 with hexproof on it. And you're like,
but you get to pay mana to give it not hexproof anymore, though.
God, so weird. Or even the turtle, the hexproof turtle from Dominaria. Was it a 6/5 or was that?
I put On Sarah's Wings on a hexproof turtle and build your own hexproof format and won the game with my ridiculous Baneslayer turtle. So many times. Oh, it's amazing.
The mental picture is great. Just how the wings barely supporting it. It's great.
Yeah.
All right. Let's move on here to number 7. My number 7 is, again, I think we're stepping on people's toes without knowing we're stepping on other people's toes. And that's cool because mine is one of those, I was thinking of this archetype and I was thinking of what you would see. And I'm thinking that like literally the first thing they play and you're like, there's only one deck. There's just one deck when you say go and they play Seed of the Synod and you go,
sure,
got it. Some other ones run different colors, but the Affinity deck is the one that wants to Seed of the Synod. They want to thought cast. There's the Kuldotha Boros stuff. Again, you can see the Great Furnace or you can see Ancient Den, but no, Seed of the Synod is like, I'm playing Affinity and that's kind of how it is. I want to get you and attack you as quickly as possible. And that's sort of where, that to me is the bellwether as to what they're playing.
I was really surprised to see how much of a splash the artifact lands have made in Pauper. Even if you're not necessarily running a devoted artifact deck, one of the reasons why, they're banned in Modern is because people think about Affinity and they're like, oh God, there's this critical mass, but there are perfectly like normal decks or non-artifact themed decks that love having these lands around. And so I was really surprised when I first started playing the format that they were so popular.
But yeah, I mean, the Affinity deck with Atogs and Carapace Forgers and Frogmites and Mirror Enforcers, and that's those are your creatures.
Yeah.
And they're awesome, and they're powerful, and they can just sort of really run up on you, and then they'll fling it or whatever, or they'll Galvanic Blast you to death, and you don't even have time to blink before you just got run over by all these crazy artifacts.
Mm-hmm.
Don't have time to blink, literally, in some cases in this Pauper format.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
All right, Ruben, what's your number 7?
My number 7, again, is another card that has a lot of ubiquity in the format, although it sees play in 2 different decks. It is an elf, so it sees play in elves, and it also sees play in the popular Stompy archetype. There's sort of a mostly green, a little bit of red Stompy kind of deck, and this is one of the favorite early drops. It's a 1/1 for 2, which is a great way to start, and it has Pseudo Vigilance. And then obviously if you put Nettle Sentinel in the Elves deck alongside things like Birchlore Rangers, you're having yourselves a hell of a good time. Nettle Sentinel originally from Eventide, once again, Evan.
Wow.
Is a 2/2 for 1 green mana. It's an elf warrior. Nettle Sentinel doesn't untap during its controller's untap step. But thankfully there's another line of text. Whenever you play a green spell, you may untap Nettle Sentinel. You get to kind of combo off with Nettle Sentinel and Birchlore Rangers in the Pauper format. You don't get Heritage Druid, thankfully. Thankfully for non-Elves players, I should say. But it also has Pseudo Vigilance that you're able to sort of attack and play an Elvish Visionary and untap it, sit back on defense if you need to. And then there's plenty of other ways to combo with Nettle Sentinel beyond that as well. But being a 1-mana 2/2 is also just kind of good enough.
Yeah.
There's just not a lot of 1-mana 2/2s in the format, and the ability to combo out a little bit with the Birchlore Rangers is amazing. And just to be very powerful, to be able to pump with different effects and stuff. Like, Nettle Sentinel really does a nice job of saying, like, I can both be an elf in the ridiculous let's play all the elves deck, and hey, I'm actually a pretty good beatdown creature.
Yep.
Yeah.
And I'm happy to do that. All right. So, Aaron, what's your number 7?
If there's Dredge in a format, I'm playing it. This is a deck. Tortured Existence is a deck that doesn't see too much play nowadays, but it is a very beloved deck. It's also very grindy. I tend to not play it just because your games are nearly guaranteed to go to time, and I like using the bathroom. But nice. Tortured Existence is a sweet deck, and this is a card that is a very important piece of the deck. They typically run 3 to 4 copies of it. And if there's anything you want to be doing, this is what you want to be doing, particularly because it makes burn players cry, and I'm completely on board. So you said Dredge and Hating Burn, and my number 7 is Golgari Brownscale. So Golgari Brownscale is 1 and 2 green. It's a creature type lizard, 2/3 from Ravnica City of Guilds. And it says when Golgari Brownscale is put into your hand from your graveyard, you gain 2 life. And then just dredge 2. So you're not dredging too much, but if you need to discard a card to Tortured Existence and then you just dredge it, and you do that a lot, burn players just scoop. And it feels hilarious. And so that's a really great reason to use this card. But it's sort of like the sort of forgotten dredge card. You know, there's a lot of focus on Stinkweed Imp, which also sees Pauper play, certainly Golgari Grave Troll being banned in formats. But this card, and particularly the zombie loam strategies in Modern and even in Pauper, when you want to be discarding and drawing, you know, just sort of gaining incremental life is not a bad thing. And so this card is a very important piece of the puzzle. And sometimes it's just a 2/3. Like I have hard cast plenty of Golgari Brownscales before, and sometimes you just get in there. And so the way to sort of, you know, insulate your life and then just another body, it's a sweet card, and is certainly welcome at the Dredge Family Picnic.
Yeah. I play a lot of the Tortured Existence deck. That's my go-to Pauper deck. Yeah, that's my go-to Pauper deck for when I'm playing spell-slinging events. I really like these goofy, grindy card decks to play in spell-slinging events to have like interesting, fun, weird games. And so I tend to play Jund or Abzan style strategies with weird twists in them whenever I have a Modern deck. I like to play sort of Dimir mid-range kind of strategies when I'm playing Standard. And I like to play, my personal favorite flavor of this deck is the Abzan flavor, because I like playing Auramancer to get back my Tortured Existence. And I've milled with Golgari Brownscale. Brownscale is very important to the strategy. It does a lot of things that nothing else in the deck does, primarily incremental life gain, because you take a lot of damage early with this deck. You're getting down your engine, you're trying to cycle things, and then you're already at 7, and then your opponent puts you to 3, and then now you're in bolt range. So if you just sit there and you've established board control, you want to start gaining a little bit of life so that you aren't just in burn range. And that is something that card allows you to do.
Yeah, it's also just not too much. Like, you don't want to deck yourself. You know, the Tortured Existence is not about milling yourself stupid like Dredges in older formats. So Dredge 2 is just right. They could say Goldilocks. Like 6 is too much, but 2 is just right. So you're just getting your little, you're dumping it in there, but you're not decking yourself, and that's very important.
I would be willing to say that Dredge would be A-okay as a mechanic if the number never got higher than 3.
Sure.
You guys.
I think that's
are any of the 3s completely busted? I don't think so. Dark Blast, Life from the Loam, Grave Shell Scarab, Golgari Brownscale. The problem arises once you get to Golgari Thug, Stinkweed Imp, Golgari Grave Troll. That's where your problems arise. Even Dakmor Salvage is fine.
Yeah. I mean, again, it's the big numbers that let you dump a whole bunch of cards in there that really broke it. Like, small numbers like Brownscale are just like, they're weird, they're incremental, they don't really matter that much, and it makes it kind of interesting. And it did make it interesting. Even back in Ravnica, sealed and draft, like, this card's neat and kind of is that little go-to guy of like, okay, you know, I got nothing to do, so I'm just going to dredge this guy back, get some life, play him go. Like, that's fine.
I mean, I love me a Shambling Shell. That was like one of my go-to draft strategies in original Ravnica, was to try to just get as many Shambling Shells as I could and stack them on top of each other and make a 7/5 or whatever with that stupid card. So I agree with that.
So moving here to number 6, you're not going to hear from me for a while, because I have a number 6 is higher and my number 5 is higher. Not really surprised by both of those things, so that's okay. So Ruben, what is your number 6?
I'm also not surprised that my number 6 is higher. But yeah, I'm a little surprised we haven't heard from my number 10 yet. Somebody put it way higher on the list, but yeah, my number 6 is higher on somebody else's list.
All right, well, Aaron, you're gonna have to carry us through here. What's your number 6?
Oh, I've got it for you. My number 6 is dumb, is infuriating, and it hinges on a wording. It hinges on the way the card is worded. It hinges on the way the ruling works and the words work. And I remember the first time I actually faced this in Bogles. I'm used to the fixed version. I'm used to the more recent version, which is known as Unflinching Courage. So I'm used to unflinching courage. And so I saw the original of this card and I thought I knew how it worked. And Magic Online set me right. And I was like, why are they gaining so much life? Like, what's going on here? And chat's like, read the card, read the card. Card is dumb. My number 6 is Armadillo Cloak. So Armadillo Cloak is 1, a green and a white. It says enchant creature. It's an aura. Enchanted creature gets +2/+2 and has trample. Okay, fine. I get that. I grok that, as Rosewater says. And then it says whenever enchanted creature deals damage, you gain that much life. Now, fun fact, if you have multiple copies of this card, you get twice the life. That's how this works. And so I'm used to Unflinching Courage where it says lifelink, where if you have 2 copies of that, you just still gain the 1 and oh no, girl. So if someone hits you for 4, oh, you're gaining 8, and it's absurd. And and it really does come down to how it's worded. And so it's not a bad thing to have multiple copies of this card in your hand because you slap them both on your creature and you have a really good time. But I just remember streaming, being online and going, where's all this life coming from? Read the card. Well, the card is absurd.
It is ridiculous, and there's a reason that the new version is all uncommon. Every single printing is uncommon because Armadillo Cloak is not a good card at common. That card is crazy. It harkens back to Genju of the Fields, which was an uncommon in Betrayers of Kamigawa because it had an activated ability that it was a 1 white mana enchant planes, 2 generic mana : until end of turn. Enchanted Planes becomes a 2/5 white spirit creature with quote, whenever it deals damage, you gain that much life. It's still a land and some other stuff. But the point is, you can activate that over and over and over. Equip, Tatsumasa and give it +5/+5 attack and gain however many times you activated it times 7. Yeah. So I did that.
It was originally printed in Invasion, and I have to say the flavor text is so Bogles. The flavor text is simply, don't laugh, it works. And it shows the armadillo rolling down the hill. It's very Bogles because there are so many things in Bogles where if you look at them separately, you're just like, really? Like a 1/1? What you gonna do with that 1/1? And they're like, whoop, it works.
Nice.
Don't laugh, it works. It also put Brian Kibler on the map. This was a card that he slapped down on Rith the Awakener to become the Dragon Master way back in the day before he had his Hall of Fame career.
Very nice. Let's move on here to number 5. Ruben, what's your number 5?
I also have an aura at number 5, and it's an aura we've referenced earlier, and it's from my favorite set, Urza's Legacy. My number 5 is Rancor. Rancor is a 1 green mana enchantment aura, originally a common from Urza's Legacy, but it's been printed as an uncommon pretty much every time since then, maybe about half and half. Most recently in Masters 25. It is an aura. Enchanted creature has +2/+0 and has trample. When Rancor is put into a graveyard from the battlefield, return Rancor to its owner's hand with that iconic flavor text, hatred outlives the hateful. Sees a lot of play in Bogles as well as that Stompy archetype. Has seen a ton of play all throughout its history. It was a really popular standard card as well. One of the most iconic and one of the most played auras before Bogles became a thing. Before suiting up things onto your hexproof 1/1s was a popular thing to do. Rancor was one of the few that saw play before that. There was a world where no one ever played auras on their own creatures, and you still usually don't. But this is one of the few that actually did.
This was my number 6, so we were right on that line of thinking. I felt like, and there's a reason for this when we talk about my number 5 eventually is why I wanted it in the top 5 spells, but I thought Rancor was right up there. It's really interesting if you actually go back and look at all the different printings, and there's been a ton of them, and this thing is still worth money. There's a reason for that. Is that sometimes it has the flavor text, and sometimes it doesn't, but it never has different flavor text. Hatred outlives the hateful. That is just the perfect 4 words to put on this thing as flavor, and if you don't, that's okay, but when you do, like they did in Masters 25, they got that stuff back in there.
Yeah,
because Rancor is awesome. So he's played a whole bunch of decks. Like, this is one of the pillars of the format. You can't deny the power of this ridiculous card. All right, Aaron, what's number 5?
When Shadows over Innistrad came around, I was really excited to get to revisit Madness because I wasn't around for the first time. And so, discarding cards and being able to cast them, that's like right up my alley. I love discarding cards. And I was a little disappointed that Madness didn't make more of a splash. And I don't know if it was just because of the way the format shaped up to be, or maybe they were just sort of powered down, but I really feel like we didn't see a lot of Madness. And so sometimes I like to go back and see how Madness was back in the good old days and see a lot of the good cards and play like the vintage cubes and Eternal Masters cubes and things like that. And this is a card that sees play in the Inside Out deck. This is a really great way to sort of protect your combo when you're trying to go off. My number 6, my number 5. My number 5 is Circular Logic. So Circular Logic is 2 colorless and a blue. It's from Torment, and it's an instant. And it says, counter target spell unless its controller pays 1 colorless for each card in your graveyard. Madness costs 1. So if you're playing Tireless Tribe anyways, there's your discard outlet. So the Tireless Tribe gets +0/+4. I now have a 1 mana counter spell. If you're playing that deck, you're probably already casting a lot of cantrips, or you're probably casting a lot of pump spells. So you have a pretty sizable graveyard. So that adds up. So for 1 blue mana, that's nice. Pay 3, pay 4. It's a really great way to protect it. And it's just so nice. And just when you look at what Madness used to be, it was good. It was really, really good. And I would have loved to have seen it be a little more beefed up when it came back around. But I look at cards like Circular Logic, and just the name is cool. The art's cool. And so when you find a good way to discard it, it's so powerful.
So Circular Logic, that the card in and of itself is super powerful. I hate Madness. I think Madness is. I don't like Madness very much.
Wow.
It's so difficult to grok and understand. When I first came back to the game and they were like, there's this Madness zone, and I'm like, what in the hell are you talking about?
That's Madness right there. What's not to grok?
No, seriously, what is to grok? This is very similar to On the Way to the Graveyard. On the way to the graveyard, we stopped off in the Madness zone, y'all. And y'all can just activate abilities all you want. Who cares? Because we're in the Madness zone. And you can play lands. You can play a land and still activate the Madness. Like, that is just so hard to grok, man. So, yeah, it blows my mind.
Yeah, I mean, we can have an impromptu version of the Red Zone here. That's fine. Madness is great. I played a ton of Blue-Green Madness, which obviously won a Pro Tour, as did Psychotog, which Circular Logic also saw play in.
Oh,
yeah. Circular Logic's great. Madness is great. Evan's stupid.
Madness... Look, the cards themselves are obviously good because they made them powerful, and that's fine. The mechanic itself, I can't. The whole Madness zone.
I got very used to how Madness worked when I played Mono Red during Time Spiral Block, and how if you want a complicated non-stack stack, discard a Fiery Temper to a Gathan Raiders.
Oh God!
Because putting the announcement of Madness trigger, announcement of Morph activation, flip my Gathan Raiders, discarding Fiery Temper, pay the mana, target your thing. Like, that was a complicated thing of things using the stack and things not using the stack. You're right, it is a little bit of a rules nightmare, and they brought it back with some of the vampires, for example. Olivia mobilized for war, for example, among the Madness cards. I do wish it had a little bit more of an impact, like Avacyn's Judgment, some of those kind of cards, nagging thoughts.
Olivia Mobilized for War did not have Madness.
I thought that it was, if you could when you discarded vampires, it gave them Madness.
Whenever another creature enters the battlefield under your control, you may discard a card. If you do, put a +1/+1 counter on that creature.
Oh, okay. It was an activator. It wasn't. So there was a 2-1 for 1 that said that vampires gained Madness of their casting cost. I thought that's what Olivia did.
Sure. But again, it's not necessarily that it's not powerful. It's just that I think it's really confusing. It's just really hard to explain that when you're discarding cards, they're going to go somewhere and hang out for a little while before they go to the rest of the way. And I thought we kind of moved past that as a game. And when I came back to Magic, back in Kamigawa, I was like, what are you saying?
That's the hill you're going to die on, Mr. Kamigawa? Get out of here.
Oh.
Wow. Now the shots are fired.
Now the shots have been fired.
Moving on here to number 4. Number 4, to me, now that I'm in my top 5, for me, my top 5 are very important. My top 5 are like, these cards are what make Pauper like tick. They make you think of what Pauper, how it works, how it's important, the things that are important in it, the creatures that are important in it. This stupid creature, Delve is broken. Delve is not a fair mechanic.
Delve is fine.
It's busted, and Gurmag Angler is way too good.
Yep.
He's playing Legacy, for God's sakes.
Vintage.
The zombie fish.
Oh my God, it's a black and 6 generic mana, even though you'll never pay that. It's a black and 6 generic mana for a zombie fish, a common from Fate Reforged. It has Delve. Each card you exile from your graveyard while casting it pays for 1 generic mana, and is a 5/5. So it is usually a 1 mana 5/5. Sometimes, when the going gets rough, it's a 2 mana 5/5.
Sure.
This card is insane. in terms of power level, in terms of the way it impacts the format. Once this thing was released, Pauper was like, oh my god, we have to somehow deal with 5/5s. It's like, Ulamog's Crusher is a thing, yes, but it's 8 mana. This is like 1, 2, sometimes 3 mana if you're really hard up.
Ulamog's Crusher requires you to tap 4 lands. This only requires you to tap 1 land.
Yeah, this is something that sees play. I've putzed around with what's called Exhumator. Exhume is sort of the really only good reanimate spell, in Pauper right now. And so I was playing a version with Insolent Neonate and this, Ulamog's Crusher. And so, plan A was to do the broken thing and get an Ulamog's Crusher on like turn 2 or 3, but you will settle for a turn 1, a 1 mana 5/5. You'll accept that,
Oh, for sure.
And so, yeah, there were all sorts of fun things you could do with that and like Dragon's Breath. And yeah, it's just hilarious.
Also sees play in the myriad of different black-based control decks, things that use Chainer's Edict and lots of those ways to fill the graveyard, things with Thought Scour as well. Also sees play in those Tortured Existence decks that I like so much, usually as a 1 or 2 of, as a quick clock to try to close out games.
Yeah, there's no doubt to me the power of Gurmag Angler. That thing has only gotten, honestly, it feels like it's only gotten better as times went by.
And it doesn't die to Victim of Night.
Gosh, the card's stupid. Ruben, what's your number 4?
My number 4 is a card that it kind of goes under the radar. It's the unsung hero of a lot of the decks that it's in, specifically Tron, that Boros Monarch deck that we were talking about. It's even in Affinity. It's a really good color fixer. It's the most played artifact in the format. My number 4 is Prophetic Prism. So for 2 colorless mana, you get an artifact that's originally from Rise of Eldrazi. When Prophetic Prism enters the battlefield, you draw a card, and you may pay a colorless and tap Prophetic Prism to add 1 mana of any color to your mana pool. Pretty much the ideal thing for those Tron decks to be playing on turn 2 right before they get Tron on turn 3 to be able to play their Angren Marauders or whatever giant 6 or 7 mana spell they're planning on playing on that turn. Also a really good thing to return with those Windhawks and Core Skyfishers that we referenced earlier to be able to get more card advantage. It cycles and replaces itself while also filtering. It's just a really, really powerful and good card.
Yeah, surprisingly dominant. And another one of those cards that when I was first getting into Pauper, we think of it as something that, when you're at a pre-release or something, you're happy to see. You're happy to see it. It's good fixing for your pre-release. But to think of it as like a competitive, makes competitive Pauper a thing, it's like I had no idea just how far-reaching it was and how good it was. And
yeah, this is a good card to say that the entire landscape of Pauper would be completely different if this card didn't exist. Like,
absolutely.
Tons of things would be different. There was an amazing version that was made in Kaladesh that was illustrated by Noah Bradley, who did a fantastic freaking job. Of course, John Avon did the original, which is no slouch by any means. And yeah, this thing just goes in a bunch of decks, and it is as efficient as you can get in terms of a cantrip.
Yeah.
So, Aaron, what's your number 4?
Spoiler season is exciting for most of us and then also for Pauper players, but it's doubly exciting because in Pauper you have what's called downshifting, which is where a card initially comes out as 1 rarity, but Wizards might realize that it's not that bad. And so they sometimes downgrade cards to common. So something will start off as an uncommon and then it's reprinted as a common, which makes it then legal in Pauper. So that's essentially Pauper's version of kind of getting new toys. And so it's always a very good day when Pauper gets new toys, when there are things that have been around for a while that are now able to be played in Pauper. At least until recently, Eternal Masters came out, and this card was an uncommon, and it immediately became a common, and immediately warped the format. Immediately broke the format within days. The format was just in a hole. I remember one of the stories I love to tell about this deck is I was in the Community Super League at the time, and my girlfriends and I were getting ready to play in the Pauper week, and I was learning the format, and this deck was a thing. And I remember my friend was teaching me how it works, and he was like, it works, but you cannot play this on camera. And I was like, why? And he was like, well, number 1, there's so many triggers that Moto's just going to collapse. And number 2, chat will hate you. And I was like, why? What do you mean? And then he demonstrated the combo for me. And I was like, oh. And then the card ended up being banned within mere weeks. And so Wizards kind of came to their senses. It couldn't be anything else. My number 4 is Peregrine Drake. So Peregrine Drake is 4 colorless and a blue. It's a creature type Drake. It's a 2/3 flying. When Peregrine Drake enters the battlefield, untap up to 5 lands. So buckle up, kids. This is how it works in Pauper. Pauper. So you cast Ghostly Flicker, targeting Mnemonic Wall in this card. Wall returns the flicker to your hand. Drake untaps more mana than the flicker costs, so you can essentially float infinite mana. And you could spend all of that mana on whatever floats your boat. You could just chain capsizes and bounce all of your opponent's permanents. You could play certain blue spells like Drowner Initiate or Sage's Road Denizen to mill your opponent. There's no limit to the things you could do, but within weeks, this just broke the format and was almost called immediately. I know Alex Ullman saw it and was like, you can't let this happen. And Wizards was like, let's just see what happens. And it was devastating to the format and just banned very, very quickly. And, something that is normally a happy time of like, yay, downgrading. This was very much be very careful with what you downgrade, because it really speaks to the power level of Pauper. One of the things I'm always surprised by in this format is how good some of these decks are. Like, they're really, really powerful. When you hear common, you tend to kind of scoff and be like, a bunch of crappy cards. Like, oh no, these cards are very powerful, and no card highlighted that like Peregrine Drake.
I mean, I would say the power levels highlighted in Peregrine Drake. This thing is stupid. It's just the whole untap mechanic. Urza Saga.
The untap mechanic. They'd learned their lesson already by banning Cloud of Fairies, but they didn't know that they were like, oh, that's 5 instead of 2. We'll be fine. No.
Yeah. I forgot to mention Prophetic Prism was my number 8. I apologize for that.
Oh, okay.
Oh, nice. Well, there you go. So that's good to know. But yeah, otherwise Peregrine Drake, it's just any untap mechanic. Anytime where it says like untap X whatevers, it's not going to work out good. Yeah. You've busted it. There's too much eyes on it.
They've banned so many of them, not just permanents, but also Frantic Search. Mm-hmm. I mean, you see it in older formats with effects like Time Spiral. It's just a problem.
It was so silly because, again, there was this kind of head in the sand, right? They're like, well, we're downshifting it. You guys are going to go crazy, and I'm sure it's going to be super fun. And we're like, no, this is going to turn into like Survival of the Fittest and Legacy, where you had the control version, you had the combo version, you had the aggro version, because nothing about this card is fair.
And that's sort of what happened with Tron. There was sort of like this combo Tron that was sort of a red-green kind of thing going on. Then Dinrova Tron, named after Dinrova Horror, happened, which was much more controlling. There were like 5-color mix-up Trons that were trying to do all the things, and that's definitely partly to blame because of Peregrine Drake.
All right, so let's take a look here at our top 3. Ruben, what's your number 3?
My number 3 is the card that sees the most play in Pauper by the numbers. It is in the most 75s. Sees very little main deck play, but it is the most ubiquitous sideboard card in all of Pauper. My number 3 is Hydroblast.
Nice.
Most recently printed in Eternal Masters, originally printed in Ice Age. Hydroblast is a 1 blue mana instant that says choose 1, counter target spell if it's red, or destroy target permanent if it's red. Sees so much play in sideboards of Affinity, of the Izzet Delver decks, of all the Delver decks for that matter, of all the Tron decks, of the Tireless Tribe decks, the Blitz decks, the Dimir Control decks, anything that wants to counter a Fire Blast or a Rolling Thunder or something along those lines, you definitely need to have access to Hydroblast.
Yeah, it's nice to see the other half getting some love. I tend to see more Pyroblasts than anything in Legacy and Vintage, but very rarely do I see Hydroblast. And so it's really nice to kind of see the other version get some love.
Yeah.
I mean, you have $1.30 in real life and $6.50 online.
Yeah.
Because it showed up once.
Says nothing quite like what the Pauper format is like.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, it's weird.
It's in almost half. About 1 in 2 decks in Pauper, 48% is the number.
Wow.
Play Hydroblast in the sideboard.
That's a lot. I mean, the idea that also that you can target any permanent. If you needed to get this out of your hand for some reason or other, you can target anything because it just says if it's whatever.
I've had people do it for storm counts. I mean, storm is largely banned in Pauper, but sure, if it's something you need to do, whoop.
Why not? Go nuts.
End of turn and get it in your graveyard so that you can untap and get that last card in your graveyard for your Gurmag Angler, something along those lines.
This is one of those nice classic spells that you go, they just don't make them like this anymore. They just don't hate like this anymore, and they never will. So good luck on the reprints.
That's exactly right.
Aaron, what's your number 3?
Pauper is surprisingly diverse, and it's a selling point that a lot of people who love the format use when they try to get people in the format. You know, you really can play anything. Like if you go through MTG Goldfish, it's so diverse. It's very, very healthy. You can play Delver, you can play Tron, you can play Inside Out, you can play One Land Spy if you like glass cannons. There really is something for everybody. But when you have a format that's that diverse, it really behooves you to have a bit of a toolbox deck that can sort of take on everything, because otherwise it kind of turns into rock, beat, scissors, which beats paper, and so on. And when you say toolbox deck, no other card embodies that, like my number 3, which is Tortured Existence, which we talked about throughout the show. So Tortured Existence came out in Stronghold. It's 1 black. It's an enchantment. It says choose and discard a creature card. Return target creature card from your graveyard to your hand. And the Tortured Existence deck tends to play a lot of one-ofs. So you'll find 1 copy of Auramancer. You'll find a couple copies of, you'll find a Fume Spitter. You'll find a Tilling Treefolk. And so it really helps you get whatever you need. And it also makes it so that the creatures you're discarding have value to them. So if you're discarding something like Stinkweed Imp, or you're discarding to, you know, your Golgari Brown Scale, which I mentioned earlier, you're really happy to have those cards in the graveyard. And so you can also play Grave Scrabbler, which is hilarious. It's another great Madness card where, you know, Madness is activated and you get 2 creatures back, which is really great. And so this really lets you tailor, you know, every game is so different when you play Tortured Existence. It really leads you to sort of grindy games, and whatever you're facing, you know that you've got some game against. And that's a really, really important thing in a diverse format like Pauper.
Interesting. They had a Pauper Classic in Roanoke at the last Invitational.
8th place.
And 8th place was an Abzan Torched Existence deck that has a bunch of really cool cards we've been talking about. Core Skyfisher, I feels like it would be an amazing card in that deck. Looking
Great
at it,
addition to that deck, absolutely.
Yeah.
Wow.
And so, you know, it's sort of it kind of suffers, I don't want to say suffers, but it kind of has the same benefit that Birthing Pot does, as long as they keep printing common creatures, you know, that happen to be in these colors, or if they're good enough splashboard, there's always going to be something to feed the existence.
Nice.
Yeah, the Tortured Existence deck has a couple of interesting cards that feed the engine. One of the most important pieces is Commune with the Gods, which is from Theros, which allows you to search for put the top 5 cards of your library in your graveyard and choose one of those that you put in there that's either a creature or an enchantment. So it lets you go and find your Tortured Existence if you don't happen to have it in your opening hand. Another big piece of that deck is Crypt Rats, one of the few wraths in the format, being able to clear out tons of small creatures, all those fairies in those fairies decks, all those, you know, little blue creatures, little red creatures that are across the board. Crypt Rats is a big piece of that too. And there's so many hilarious one-ofs that you get to put in your Tortured Existence deck, depending on what the format asks for. You can play something like a Battlefield Scrounger or a Perilous Mirror. You know, the list goes on and on.
Horror of the Broken Lands.
Horror of the Broken Lands is a great one. That one lets you continue your engine with the cycling. That's an awesome one. I also am a big fan of, I forget what the name of it is, but there's a 3-color with a black 2/3 flyer that exploits, that allows you to draw 2 cards and lose 2 life when it exploits.
Scavenger?
Sultai Scavenger, that's the one. So there's and Tilling Treefolk, as you mentioned. There are just so many cool creatures with interesting, fun effects that you can put in that deck. Not to mention cards that aren't black and green. You know, if you're splashing red, there's a red version and there's a white version. There's so many cool things that you can do with that deck. And Tortured Existence is one of the best engines available in the Pauper format.
Only been printed once isn't that expensive. You can get a play set for like $2.50 or so online. Which is nice, because again, this is one of those decks, like, maybe it's not as good as it used to be. You know, maybe the other decks have gotten tuned a little bit finer, but like it's a lot of fun to kind of play around with the triggers and, you know, how your creatures are going back and forth to the graveyard.
Especially if you come to grind, like they'll make you go to time every time, and they're happy to do it, and God bless them.
Oh yeah,
Pauper does tend to have those fast kind of Izzet Blitz, Inside Out. They think they're going to get the game over. Oh no, girl, get comfy.
We're gonna slow down here. I'm gonna play a Crypt Rats. You guys to go.
Everybody get comfortable. Yeah,
that's right.
Get your donut pillow.
Wow. Straight to donut pillows, y'all.
Well, be glad I didn't mention the beaded chair, like the taxi drivers have when you put like the bead.
Yeah.
Oh my God. All right. Well, look, for my number 3 in my top 3 all-time Pauper cards, my favorite Pauper cards, there was one where I was like, man, first of all, this card is broken. And it was broken in a nice time where everything was broken, because it was back in the early days of Magic. They didn't know what they were doing, and they just broke everything. And this is one of those nice cards that you go like, and it was common. And they're like, and it was common? Really? And you're like, yeah, there's this elf you see. Her name's Priest of Titania. And there ain't nothing fair about this card. Literally nothing. And you go, and it was common, and there's a soccer. And they're like, What? And you're just like, yeah, they didn't know any better. It's really weird. Priest of Titania is a green and generic mana for a 1/1 elf druid that just says tap, add 1 green to your mana pool for every elf on the battlefield. Note that's on the battlefield, not just your battlefield, everybody's battlefield. That means mirror matches get really stupid really quickly.
Thousands, yeah.
Oh my god, it's just insane. So Urza's Saga, this card is $4.50 in real life because it's a powerhouse in Commander. They printed it in Commander 2014. Didn't matter, still worth $4 to $5 because this is an amazing spell. Like, this is a great spell in your elf deck, and it just destroys in that deck. This is the #1 card you want to curve right into. Turn 1 elf, turn 2 priest, and just go nuts because she makes mana like nothing makes mana, and it was common. And there's a Saga. I can't. It kills me.
Yeah, this is something my friend Kendra, I mentioned her earlier in the show. She's known as the Maverick Girl. She's sort of to Pauper elves what I am to Dread. So she loves elves. And she'd even sent me a message the other day and she was like, don't forget her. She better be on one of your lists. And I was like, she may not be on mine. I don't know. But yeah, we definitely, and I think that might have been a card. I think it didn't make our elves list either. I think somebody had kind of called us out for that. Like, how are you going to do that? And so, yeah, it's scary. Elves is very scary in just about every format. But there's a very unique level of fear that comes along with Pauper elves, again, because you just assume it's a bunch of commons. Like, what are you gonna do with all that mana? Make some commons? Oh yeah, it gets out of hand quickly. There's the Well-Wisher, which helps you gain all the life. There's the and then you play something like Distant Melody, which is sort of like their version of like Glimpse of Nature, and things get out of hand very, very quickly.
Lead the Stampede, Timberwatch Elf, Quarian Ranger to power up all those extra
on a Huntmaster.
On a Huntmaster, just a terrifying array of synergistic cards.
Yeah, it is absolutely wonderful, and I love it, but it's broken. There's nothing fair about it anymore. Moving here to number 2. Ruben, what's your number 2 Pauper card?
My number 2 Pauper card is the most played creature in Pauper, and I was a little surprised that it was the most played creature in Pauper. It is the most. It sees more play than any of the others, including what I thought number 2 was going to be, which might be one of your number 2 or number 1s. So I'll save that for later. But it's Augur of Bolas.
Nice.
I had no idea that Augur of Bolas saw play in around a quarter of all decks.
Wow.
Augur of Bolas is a common thanks to Modern Masters 2017, originally printed in Magic 2013 as an uncommon. And it has the following ability. It is a 1/3 Merfolk Wizard for a colorless and a blue. When Augur of Bolas enters the battlefield, look at the top 3 cards of your library. You may reveal an instant or sorcery card from among them and put it in your hand. Put the rest on the bottom of your library in any order. Sees play in every Delver deck you can imagine, every blue-red control, every blue-black control deck you can imagine. Sees play in Kiln Fiend, sees play in Tireless Tribe, sees play in those mono-blue aggro, like the Deep Hours aggro decks. It just is all over the goddamn place.
Yeah, we can't have it in standard anymore. Like, we keep getting Omen Speaker, but they'll never let us have that again.
No, this card is way too good. It's also really relevant for the format as a whole because it has that 3 toughness and comes down on turn 2 so often. Aggro decks have a real problem unless they're the super go wide, as we mentioned, the Boros, Boldotha kind of decks, or the Elves decks that go really wide. You can't just play a 2/2 and hope that it gets there.
Well, we've also talked about how much bounce is in the format, and in being able to have that ETB ability, you can sort of really abuse that.
Yeah, the idea that this made its way to Pauper is, it was one of those like, wow, really, guys? This card is incredibly amazing. Like, it replaces itself. It's a 1/3. It finds you the spell type that you're usually looking for in those decks anyway. Because, like, I want to find a counter spell, or I want you to know that I have this removal spell or this bolt or whatever it is. Because it's any instant or sorcery. It's not like it gets a blue card. It gets any of them. So I am not that surprised. And particularly when you start sort of looking into the Pauper, you go like, oh, there's 4 Augurs there, and there's 4 Augurs over there, and oh look, if it has blue mana, there's a pretty good chance
that there's Augur of Bolas in the deck.
Yeah, absolutely. Aaron, what's your number 2?
Speaking of blue mana, I've mentioned throughout the show my first few experiences playing Pauper and how I realized that we really weren't in Kansas anymore. Seeing the cards like Prophetic Prism and Augur of Bolas and things of that nature that were dominant. I'd never seen that before. But what really hammered the point home for me was when I saw cards that were restricted in some of the oldest formats in the game be unrestricted, and you can run 4 copies of them. And it's just like, I don't understand. This is a card that is restricted in Vintage, and it is so good that there is a whole book around it, multiple editions of a book. Go talk to Stephen Menendian if you want to talk about this card. My number 2 is Gush. So Gush costs 4 colorless and a blue. It came out in Mercadian Masks in an instant. You may return 2 islands you control to their owner's hand instead of paying Gush's mana cost and draw 2 cards. This is unrestricted. You can play 4. What? This card is ridiculous. It's a $5 card in paper. It's so good that you can only have 1 in Vintage, and even then it has been consistently, there's just so much ink that's been spilled about Gush and how to best use Gush, when to do it, whether or not you should tap it first and float the mana, and what you should do with it. There's a science to this card, similar to cards like Brainstorm and Thoughtseize. And you can just play them. You can play 4. And so, in a format like this with Augur Bolus fine. Gush, sure. It's just ridiculously good. I started seeing some discussions about whether or not it should be banned in Pauper, because some people feel like, blue is again becoming kind of dominant, and this is a big reason why. But what did you expect? It's banned in Vintage. Like, it was only a matter of time before it started to affect this other format, and you can play 4.
Well, restricted in Vintage, but but regardless, and a foil will only. Legacy? Oh yeah, a foil will only set you back $60.
Yeah,
for that one, because it's from Mercadian Masks foil, and they don't make many of those. But Gush in and of itself is just, how many cards get books written about them? You just don't see that. Very, very few. And again, few love a Gush like Steve Menendian loves a Gush. And then they kept like unbanning it and then banning it, and then they unbanned it and they're like, oh God, and they're banning it again.
No card that has a relationship with a banned list quite like Gush has with the Vintage restricted list. It's been on and off the ban list like 5 times.
Oh yeah. So
that's an on and off relationship, very similar to some reference that Aaron's going to have to help me with.
Wow. Well, look, my number 2 is probably Ruben's number 6, is probably the creature you were just talking about a minute ago. It is a card that defines decks. It is a card that defines formats. It is a card that you go, God, how many times are we going to see this card? Forever. We're going to see Delver of Secrets forever.
Yep.
We're never getting rid of it. It's always going to be there. I made a whole episode of Forgotten Lore about this one card, because this one card drives so much of Magic and so much of Pauper as well. Delver of Secrets, if you don't happen to know, is a 1 blue 1/1, and at the beginning of your upkeep, you look at the top card of your library. You may reveal it. If it's an instant or sorcery, you transform it into the ever magical Insectile Aberration. That is a human insect that is a 3/2 flyer. So for 1 mana on turn 2, you could potentially have a 3/2 flyer. And I went back into the history books and what people said about what, and everybody made fun of it. No one really noticed it. No one said much of anything. And then, oh my God, it completely ran one of the oldest formats in the game and has become a force to be reckoned with in basically every format. I don't know. Delver hasn't seen much Vintage play, has it?
People try. People try to do the blue-red version tends to see some play. I mean, it doesn't take much. It's a great port. Like, you can just port it over kind of from Legacy. I mean, there's a couple people who are just sort of diehard, Delver players, but it really doesn't go any more than just, they boil it down to the blue-red, and it's really all you need. But yeah, it's pretty every format: Modern, Legacy, Vintage, Pauper. Yeah.
It's just
even if it's not the most popular at any given time, like, it's not great in Modern right now. It's not particularly
worse things to be doing.
I mean, there are worse things to be doing, to be sure, but I think most people would rather be playing the Snapcaster Control kind of versions. But it certainly has had its day in the sun. You are correct. This was my number 6. Nice. Delver of Secrets. The other thing about Delver is that it sees play in decks that it itself is the name for, like it's the title track. That there's something to be said about blue-red Delver, not blue-red Augur of Bolas.
Yeah.
It's a Delver deck, and sort of what that means. If you can take a deck in Legacy that has as much gravitas and provenance as Canadian Threshold, and the entire deck's name changes as a result of your printing, because then it became Emer Delver, that's saying something. And it's no different in Pauper. A lot of the most popular decks, sort of like the blue-red Scred decks. There's a deck called Is It Blitz, which is a Nivix Cyclops deck that has Delver Secrets as well. Tons of mono blue Delver with the Deep Hours, Fairy Miscreants, and stuff like that. Honestly, Delver Secrets isn't that good of a card. Insectile Aberration's the card you want. But you got to start with the Delver, and I think it's well deserving of a higher slot than even my number 6.
Because there's nothing sadder / funnier than when the Delver don't flip. You're just like, oh girl, like what is your life right now?
Yeah, and there's some things that are very scary. One of them is turn 1 Delver, don't flip it. Turn 2 Delver, and you're just like, oh no, I'm so dead.
Oh God, that's horrifying. Well,
please, Magic God, smile upon me.
We're gonna move here to our number 1 choice. Ruben, what was your number 1 Pauper card?
My number 1 Pauper card sees play in Delver decks. It sees play in Tron decks. It sees play in Boros decks. It sees play in Goblins decks. It sees play in Kiln Fiend. It sees play in Red Deck Wins. It is the Red Deck Wins card. It might be the winner of the Magic bracket come a couple weeks from now as the most popular Magic card that has ever been printed. It is the 3rd most popular card in the format after Hydroblast and Preordain. If anybody didn't know, Preordain sees a lot of play as well. My number 1 is Lightning Bolt.
Nice.
Lightning Bolt is 1 red mana and says Lightning Bolt deals 3 damage to any target.
The ultimate common, yeah.
Oh my God. I just grin when I see this card on my computer screen. It just makes me so happy.
I think it also just makes me so ridiculously sad when I go back and I look at whatever the cost. What's these days for a beta? It's about $116.
Yep, $116. Alphas are a crisp $290 bill.
Man, I used to get these for like $5 a pop. Like that was kind of the rate, you know. It was a bolt, so it was a meat bolt, but no one really cared that much about it. And nowadays,
even the more common ones like Magic 2011, they go for almost $3 a pop. Like they're still not cheap.
Oh yeah, even if they were to bring it back into standard, it would never go below $2 a piece. Like they that's Bolt. Like Bolt is just it is Bolt. You can't get more efficient. You can't get more iconic. It could very well win that bracket. I would have not be shocked at all.
It's probably going to face Black Lotus in the finals of the most popular card ever printed bracket.
Rightfully so, yeah.
And by the way, I've heard from a couple of sources that like nowadays Alpha Black Lotus is like $80,000. People think that might be $1 million card in 10 years.
Maybe.
Wow.
I mean, it's only going upwards. This was my number 5 because I certainly feel like Lightning Bolt deserves to be in the top 5 of the format. It is unquestionably one of the best cards ever made, one of the most iconic cards ever in the game, and it's a terrific choice. Aaron, what's your number 1?
Whew, this one is just plain fun, but it also ticks off a lot of boxes for me. So number 1, it's good. It's in a good popular deck. Number 2, it's weird. It's a card where you're like, this is a thing? Like, okay. Number 3, there's a huge financial disparity. They're probably one of the biggest. It's one that the professor loves to rave about. Particularly when it comes to the issue of reprints. And he's very passionate about the fact that, you know, we've talked about it before, that there are certain cards that are really, really good in Pauper that we just don't see anymore. And so there are people that can afford them on Magic Online, but in paper, they're very expensive, and sort of the vice versa. And this one, particularly the vice versa. The issue with Thorn of the Black Rose was that she was very cheap in paper, but very expensive on Magic Online. This card is the opposite problem. This card is $60 in paper. Magic Online, 45 cents. My number 1 is Oubliette. So Oubliette is 1 and 2 black. It was originally printed in Arabian Nights. It says, when Oubliette enters the battlefield, exile a target creature and all auras attached to it. Hello, Bogles. Note the number and kind of counters that were on that creature. This was the olden days when they gave you the weird text. When Oubliette leaves the battlefield, return that exiled card to the battlefield under its owner's control tapped with the noted number and kind of counters on it. Write that down. If you do, return the other exiled cards to the battlefield under their owner's control attached to that permanence. This sees play in the mono black control decks. This is basically the mono black O-ring, which again we will never see. Has there been anything like Oubliette in black since then? No, it's usually just destroys it, right? So there's just nothing else like this. But when you look at it and you're like, you know, so it has that sort of that factor of like you're playing Pauper for the first time and you're like, I remember that card, and you're like, oh, it's you guys play that here? Like, okay. And then the price disparity, 45 cents on Magic Online. It's not even a full ticket, but in paper, it's $60. Like that makes this card unusually difficult to afford. And so it's weird, it's expensive, it's good, and it's black, which I love black cards. It starts with an O. I love all things O, and so it's got to be my number 1.
Original Oubliette.
Well, first of all, good news, everybody. It's only $40 on CoolStuffInc.com.
Oh,
perfect.
But secondly,
discount.
Mark Rosewater answered, if not today, yesterday, that reprinting Oubliette is a win, not an if. So they are going to now, and he also said like not in standard, like duh, because we don't need it in standard.
That's
modern,
a weird card to put in standard.
Yeah, I don't want it in standard. I don't want it in modern. Just go put it in some weird commander deck and be done with it.
It's out of the color pie. It's just kind of anachronistic because we already have Oblivion Ring.
Plus, just look at all the words on it. Like it would look ridiculous.
Yeah. I mean, it would look absurd. This is like putting Animate Dead in a standard legal set. It's just words.
Okay, now you've gone too far. Okay,
we'll fight. Hopefully, this will make you like me a little bit better, Aaron. This was my number 10.
Okay.
Nice. Well,
just because I feel like Mono Black Control is a it's been a part of the format since its inception, and I feel like Oubliette was a big part of that.
It's just fun to say too, Oubliette.
Yeah, Oubliette.
Well, look,
Evan, can you pronounce it?
Oubliette, yes.
Okay, and
okay, good.
I know the southern thing gets in the way.
Oubliette, Eddie.
I'm a
lady. Hell far. Now look, I kind of cheated. You're only supposed to choose one card for each slot. That's the deal.
Unbelievable. Some people's children, I'll tell you what.
I know, right? But I couldn't. You know what? It's our show.
You're supposed to be a role
want.
model.
I'm supposed to show people like this is how you're supposed to do it. You're not supposed to say, look, you can't just go to number 1 and just choose 3 cards because you feel like it. And I'm like, well, you can't just choose one. What am I supposed to choose? The tower? Is that what I'm supposed to choose? To choose the power plant? Am I supposed to choose the Urza mine? Urza's mine, Urza's power plant, Urza's tower is my number 1 Pauper Cards.
Get him.
It's just...
I'm okay with it. I figured out a workaround with Prophetic Prism.
You did, and I appreciate that. But I'll just go ahead and read Urza's Tower because it's the most powerful one. Urza's Tower was a common originally printed in Antiquities. It was later reprinted a whole bunch of times in places like Chronicles and whatnot. But originally, there was one version that was common in Antiquities and 3 that were uncommon because that was stupid.
The way Antiquities worked was weird. They had different rarities. There was a rarer version of common and a more common version of uncommon.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So either way, the land itself says tap to add 1 colorless mana. If you control an Urza's Mine and an Urza's Power Plant, you add 3 colorless mana instead. And this is the good old fashioned. This is straight wingdings. We're talking colorless mana.
Yeah, actual colorless.
And yeah, this land set runs modern. It runs through Pauper. It's ran through other formats at various time periods. Not so much the vintages, but we have
some decency.
Some amount. But this thing,
or in Legacy, you just play Cloud Post.
Yeah, you just can't get through, I think, a Pauper event usually, at least in my experience, without running into an Urza deck. Like the Urzatron is a
popular archetype in the format right now, for sure.
Yeah, and that just shows that this power of these cards, the ability for them to reprint them is fan-freaking-tastic, because they could reprint them in a supplemental set. They can make special versions of them that, sort of San Diego Comic-Con-esque they can do with that stuff, and they remain powerful. And yeah, they're hating on them like crazy because it's stupidly good to get Natural Tron, Karn. That's a thing, but they give you new tools to hate on one of the hallmarks of Magic is the Urzatron.
Even when it's not doing, it's sort of, modern, you immediately think of turn 3 Karn, but even the things it's doing in Pauper are still broken. One of the things you mentioned earlier, Ruben, was the fan graph thing. You still get like a 5/5. The thing
fan graph,
right? And so they run a lot of artifacts that sacrifice, and so not only do you have a 5/5, you're still gaining boatloads of life, and so it attacks you on such a different axis that you almost feel safer because of it. Like I remember coming in and going, "Whew, no Ugins, no Karns. This is going to be a breeze." And it's like, "Oh no, we're just going to make Ulamog's Pressures. We're just going to do." Things like that.
Cast Rolling Thunder for $1 billion, or
it's still terrifying that you just
4 times in one turn.
Yeah, it's very disarming in the fact that you assume because it's Pauper that it's going to be somehow less powerful, and oh no, it's still terrifying.
Mm-hmm. Oh yeah, it's just as good. It's one of those things where they're never going to make them like this. They're never going to give it back to us, and the ability for the deck to have just such haymakers, like everything once they get drawn. Oh God, every card they draw can be ridiculous because they're fully powered and you're scared.
Mm-hmm.
The most popular version of this deck right now is the Dinrova Tron decks that we were referencing earlier, thanks to Modern Masters printing Dinrova Horror at common. You get access to Mystical Teachings to use all that extra colorless mana to be able to dig out your one cut Capsize or your Forbidden Alchemy or whatever it is that you want to go get, your Pulse of Marasa that we touched on earlier. Not to mention your Ghostly Flicker combo that sets up your endgame with Mnemonic Wall. Just a really powerful archetype. And then there are plenty of other versions. There's the Stonehorn Dignitary Ghostly Flicker control version. There's the red-green version that we were talking about earlier that sacrifices a bunch of artifacts with your Fangren Marauder and things like that. Not to mention Ulamog's Crusher. Just play an 8/8.
With Annihilator,
there's so many things that you can do with colorless mana, and that much of it in this format.
Absolutely. So that was our top 10 Pauper cards. You will see them right now on the screen for your review. Take a look at my list, Aaron's list, Ruben's top 10, and we want to hear from you about what card we did not talk about, and we'll select our favorite to win a $50 gift certificate to CoolStuffInc.com. But before we go, I want to thank my co-hosts. Thank you, Aaron.
Thank you for having me.
Thank you, Ruben.
Thank you.
We're going to move here to our final slide. I want to thank our sponsor, CoolStuffInc.com, our co-sponsor, CardHoarder.com, my co-hosts, Aaron Campbell and Ruben Bressler, you guys for watching and listening, and hope you support us at Patreon.com/MagicMikes. Please follow, like, tweet, favorite, share, subscribe to everything social that tells people we exist. Catch us online at Twitch.tv at Magic Mikes, on Twitter at Magic Mikes Cast, our Magic Mikes subreddit, and like the Magic Mikes page on Facebook. Talk to us privately at MagicMikesPodcast@gmail.com. Follow the audio-only podcast at Magic Mikes Podcast at Libsyn.com, or find us on iTunes, or join us here next week. Well, actually, not next week, 2 weeks from now, because we're filming a set review, y'all.
Next week, we're talking about some commons, but it'll be in a different context. We're also going to talk about all the rares and the mythics and the uncommons, too.
Yeah, those included, too, for another episode of Magic Mikes. Good night, everybody.